When you're building an application, there's a lot of pressure to keep security vulnerabilities out of your code. But no matter how skilled you are, between your own code, dependencies, and configurations, you can't catch them all on your own. But that's why Sneak's here. We're the secure development platform that can extend the security reach of every developer. With Sneak, you don't have to handle security vulnerabilities on your own. Sneak. Develop fast. Stay secure.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the next session called Modern Web Development with Nuxt3. Another great session. Joining us tonight as a speaker is Alexander Lichter. He is a computer geek, self-taught developer who runs his own company right now, and he's joining us tonight from Leipzig, Germany. Welcome, Alexander.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Very nice to have you. Enjoy your session. And yeah, I'm really excited about the Q&A session afterwards. See you.
Me too. See ya. So yeah, thanks for joining my talk, Modern Web Development with Nuxt3. Maybe you've heard of Nuxt3 today before from Daniel, saw his talk. So there will be a few things common and a few not. So yeah, I would say let's just start right in and see what we'll find. So first, just a few words about me. I'm Alex. I am Nuxt3's maintainer. I'm on Twitter every now and then, posting more or less interesting stuff. I have a website that I also try to update frequently. Sometimes, trying is the thing. And yeah, as announced, I'm a web development consultant. I'm self-employed at development, and my main focus, of course, is Vue and Nuxt.js. So yeah, the talk today is about Nuxt3 and modern web development. But before we start with this, I want to talk a bit about Nuxt2. So Nuxt2 is the intuitive Vue framework. And if there are some people that haven't used Nuxt before, you can think of it as like Vue on steroids. So take like Vue and add amazing features on top. If you haven't used Vue yet, then you definitely should and should give it a try. So just let's see what Nuxt.js 2, which is like mature now, is built with. So there are a few things here. At first, we have Vue 2. Then, of course, using the Vue router and also Vue meta. And if you want, Vuex as state management. And under the hood, we have Webpack 4 as our bundler, able for transpiling the JavaScript, and post CSS, auto prefixer, and so on for all cool CSS manipulations. So that's the stack here. And you may wonder, okay, why should I actually use like Nuxt if you haven't used it before? Why can't I just like use Vue and then add Vue router on myself and also like Webpack and Babel? And the simple answer is using Nuxt will definitely make your life as a developer easier. That's it. And now, okay, that's a bold claim. The question is, how? And there are a few things. First of all, Nuxt comes with batteries included. It is fully optimized, very versatile, modular, and very important too, developer friendly. But yeah, now we want to talk about Nuxt3. And you may wonder, okay, we have Nuxt2, so why is there a new major version? Why do we need Nuxt3? There are a few reasons for that. So first of all, dependencies came out with like major internal changes that were hard to add without any breaking changes here. So first and foremost, of course, Vue 3 had been released. Nuxt.js 2 is running on Vue 2. Nuxt.js 3 is, you guessed it, running on Vue 3. And same goes for Webpack 5 and also a few other dependencies. Another thing is that Vite had been released as next generation tooling. And if you use Nuxt2, then you might have seen that there is a module for Nuxt2 available that brings in the Vite dev server for Nuxt2, but of course, a deeper integration was desired. And as usual with many major versions, there are a few internal refactorings that like weren't able, we couldn't pull them off unless we add breaking changes or feature flags, and also like cleaning up legacy code and so on and so on. One of the pain points also was that we wanted to improve support for deployments, especially on the serverless platforms and also on edge computing platforms like Workers, Cloudflare Workers, and so on. Also, a key factor was that if you just build a small site, say a landing page, then you might not need even view router. So making that optional and start with very, very simple style is also not possible in Nuxt2, easily at least. So that was also a goal. So eventually, Nuxt3 is here. It's in beta right now. And of course, it starts with Vue 3. Then Webpack 5 comes in, or as I mentioned before, Vite. ES build is also used if you don't recognize the logo with the 2 arrows and the yellow circle. That's ES build. And post CSS is also in. But I talked about internal refactorings a little. So that was used to more or less pull many functionalities out of the already lean core. And those were moved to another GitHub organization and many small packages. And that's called un.js. And you see, I'd say, a small sample size of the packages that are provided through the organization. And this has lots of benefits here. So you might see some that are familiar to you, like Consola, or maybe you also read about IPX and so on. But yeah, the main points here were that through un.js, modules and packages could be decoupled. So those things could be like pulled out of the core, still be used there, and they're still powering the Nuxt core. But they're not now fully and tightly coupled to Nuxt. So they can be used in any JS or TS project, if you like. Even, of course, in your own ones that do not use Nuxt, for example, but need that utility. And of course, testing the whole Nuxt core as is was difficult, but testing this small isolated package is, of course, way easier. So it's better to break things apart, test them there, and then just put them together again. And as I mentioned, these packages can be helpful for other projects, for other frameworks, of course, but even, as I said, for your private projects, wherever you want. So yeah, we now have Nuxt3, and it's in beta. And still, the point is, Nuxt will help developers. But yeah, the question is how. And we already got a rough gist of that. But now, okay, there are 5 points here. What do they mean? Let's start with batteries included. So first of all, as I mentioned before, Nuxt comes with common libraries if necessary. Like the view router, you can use it if you don't need it. If you have a very simple site, it's not included, of course. And it also helps with manipulating the document head. So adding like meta tags and so on through the use meta composable, or in Nuxt2 through a view meta. And then I mentioned it, we have build tools that are configured out of the box. So no nasty configuration, Nuxt will do it all for you. Post CSS setup, ES build will be used, Webpack 5 or Vite as you like. You can turn Vite off, you can turn it on, it's turned off on by default. So you don't have to change a thing. The cool thing is, of course, you can. So you're not locked in. You're not saying, okay, I only have to use Nuxt as is. You can fully configure every tiny piece you want, if you have to, if the requirements are, well, provoking it, so to say. And of course, Nuxt comes with a basic but flexible folder structure, which we'll see in a minute, which gives guidance to people new to projects. And yeah, basically I would say you feel home if you go through from one Nuxt project to another. You recognize the folder names, you understand how things work. There's like a convention for all the projects. Again, you can adhere to that. You can, of course, change it too if you want, but that's the recommendation here. And one of my personal favorites is file system-based routing. That also exists since, I think, even Nuxt 1. So this is extremely cool. We don't have to write router config or anything, and we'll also see that in action later. And then we have supercharged components. So your regular Vue components are even improved further. So Nuxt has a layout concept. So you have page components, and then you can say you wrap a layout around them, which will more or less work as which will more or less work as a layout around the pages. And this allows us to make transitions easier. So creating transitions and animations between pages is super easy in Nuxt. In Nuxt2 even, but also in Nuxt3. And then we also have composables for the composition API of Vue3 that make data fetching a breeze. In Nuxt2, you could also use the composition API with a module, but in Nuxt3, of course, it's built in by design and first-class citizen. So yeah, few cool things, but let's take a look at the folder structure. So with Nuxt3, there can be a couple of folders actually. So you see here, we have like an assets folder where like your SCSS or CSS files or something can be in. There can be a components folder for all your Vue components, a composables folder, of course, for all your composables for the composition API, a layouts folder for the layouts, a pages for the page component, a plugins folder for all your Nuxt plugins, and the public folder for like static files. And in Nuxt2, that was called static. And thanks to the new Nuxt3 server engine, we can also have server endpoints easily. So yeah, there can be lots of folders, and in larger projects, you will see them. But of course, you don't have to have that many folders. That's the good part. You only need an app.vue to get started. This is super easy. And yeah, let's take a look at the pages folder here a bit in depth, because I remember that Daniel said he won't talk about that and did not during his talk. So we will see what file system routing actually means. So in our pages folder, we can have Vue components, and it is kind of similar to like old days where you had like PHP and you just added an index.php and it was just there. So this works the same here. We can just add an index.vue, and it will be mapped to just your domain.com and then the slash. And of course, we can also add like an about.vue, and it will be mapped to /about your domain, or localhost 3000 about. And there are a few more important parts here, like what if we have dynamic things? Like in our example, we have a user subfolder, and we want to say, okay, let's add in a dynamic route, it's based on the user ID. So we have /user because it's a user subfolder, and then the ID as a dynamic parameter, here declared by square brackets. And in Nuxt3, that's new. Before it was an underscore for underscore ID. And again, we can also do this just with partial parts of the URL, which is super cool. So before it was limited to either you have a dynamic route or a static one. And now we can even do something like post dash and then some dynamic parameter here. So you just put that in your page folder, or pages folder, sorry. And what's happening now is it will, thanks to Nuxt, magically transformed to an actually router config. So what you see here is more or less equal to the Vue router config you would normally write. You have a name, path, okay, of course a file, a children if they're in children, and the component, which is in this case pages index.vue. And as you see, this works for all these cases here. And you can even have more advanced things like catch-all routes, children, and so on and so on. So this is all thought through, and you can like just use it and never worry about writing router configs anymore. Great, right? So talking about the second part, that's being optimized. So Nuxt uses code splitting by default. That's super important. If you never ever used code splitting, then maybe you're doing it already, because many tools have that built in. But it is super important, crucial for performance, that you don't load all your JavaScript, but instead say, hey, I only need like all the global things plus the current route and the components used the current route. And then when that's loaded and the user sees everything, we can load other things or preload stuff. Also, as I mentioned, sensible default configs for all the build tools. That also is related to chunking, for example. And it also means that assets, like static assets, but also JavaScript files, will be fingerprinted, and the cache will be automatically busted. This basically means if you have a file, say you have a JavaScript file of your Vue component eventually, it will get hash at the end which is called content hash in this case. So just the content of this file will be hashed and added. And if the content changes, the hash changes too. And then the cache will load the new file because the name changes. So easy cache busting, no big deal. Then there also is a modern mode, or now it's like a legacy mode, because the idea was in Nuxt2 that we say, hey, why should we deliver transpiled JavaScript to evergreen browsers that understand all the cool new things like optional chaining and knowledge coalescing operator and so on. So in Nuxt2, there was this modern mode saying, hey, all evergreen browsers just get the new almost untranspiled files. And for legacy browsers, well, ship them the old transpiled stuff. In Nuxt3, it's actually inverted. So by default, the modern mode is turned on, so to say. So everyone gets the modern stuff. And if you want to support legacy things, well, then you can toggle that too. And then one of the coolest things is smart prefetching. This basically means after you loaded the code for your routes, so JavaScript, CSS, and so on, and there is a Nuxt link in the viewport, well, then you can decide, again, config also per link, to prefetch the JavaScript needed for that route if it's in the viewport. So this means that the user experience when navigating will be even quicker. This might be also known from other frameworks, but again, here, this is super crucial for performance. It can be turned on for all links, can be turned off, can be finely or adjusted granularly. So lots of possibilities here. Yeah, and of course, there are even more optimizations. I haven't talked about the server optimizations when it comes to cold starts, because this is what you want to avoid when using serverless, or also generally edge computing as well. Then your server should take milliseconds, like 200, 400 milliseconds to even start and deliver. Ideally, this is as low as possible. Say 10 milliseconds isn't too bad. And of course, with the new server engine, and also Daniel told you this afternoon, this works well. So yeah, another part of Nuxt is the versatility. And what this means is you can build almost any kind of application with Nuxt. You can build classic SPAs if you like. Yeah, you can build it as you would only have Vue in theory. You can add, if you start and you only know Vue, you can start adding Nuxt.js features step by step. You can do as you would usually do with Vue. Just put in your components in the pages folder and also in the components folder, all good. And then you can explore the Nuxt goodies and add them step by step. But it still can be a plain old SPA. That's not a big deal. But of course, Nuxt also supports server-side rendering. And this is, of course, crucial for modern sites that are public-facing. So everything that's related to SEO, for example. And there are, I would say, personally, two parts of server-side rendering, which is dynamic server-side rendering and static site generation. So dynamic server-side rendering means whenever you request a page, on the initial request, like coming from Google or doing a hard refresh, then the server, the Node.js server, will answer that. But we will see this in a second, how this will work. And for static site generation, this whole process will happen at build time. But yeah, this is quite, I would say, complicated. So let's take a look how this works. We start with the SPA. So the SPA is quite simple. We have a browser, and the browser will do a request to a CDN. So far, so good. And the CDN will return an empty HTML file plus JavaScript. So the HTML file will just include a spinner, ideally, and yeah, maybe a title even, and of course the JavaScript that loads your application. And then the browser has to parse the JavaScript and download it, of course. And then your site is more or less visible because the data is missing, if you have any. So there will be a request to the API from the browser through the JavaScript. And after response, your site is visible. Nice. So if we use server-side rendering, as I mentioned, the whole flow is a bit different. So for dynamic server-side rendering, each request is not hitting a CDN, but a node server. The initial one, of course, the initial request. This is super important. Only the first ever request, if you, as I said, hard reload the page, come from another page and so on, will hit that server. And the server will request your API. And the API will return JSON, of course. Or maybe XML if you're old-fashioned, but that's super uncommon, right? So the node server will take the JSON, and you all write this in your components already. And then the node server will deliver HTML and JSON. So JavaScript, sorry, from the JSON. So it will take all the components, do all the requests that you would usually do in a client, and then just render them to a string. So this means you get all the HTML, everything is visible as soon as the user gets the HTML block, and there's still this JavaScript included to make your application a single page application. So while the user is downloading and parsing, or the browser is downloading and parsing the JavaScript, the user sees everything already. And then after downloading and parsing, there's this process called hydration, where the HTML that has been delivered from the server is used by Vue to make it reactive, so to say. So you could also say, yeah, just throw it away. But in this case, why should we throw it away when it's already there? So we take it and we'll make it reactive. And from that point on, whenever doing something on the page, navigating, it's just a plain old SPA. Only the initial request is different. That's super important. Yeah, then we have static site generation, and there are two steps, so to say. There's the generation step, where the Node.js server, more or less, so if we run something like yarn generate or npm run generate, will do the same as when using dynamic SSR, but for each page beforehand, so during the build step. So it will send a request and prepare some HTML files, because the JSON will be used again for like all the components, all the sites, to render everything as a static asset. So HTML plus JavaScript that the browser got dynamically beforehand will render to an HTML file. And this will be pushed to your platform provider, be it like Netlify, GitHub Pages, your own virtual private server. It doesn't matter at all. And then we have the client step, of course, where it's more or less the same with an SPA. Like the browser says, hey, give me the data. It's just static assets. But in this case, the HTML isn't empty anymore because the content has been written there. So there will be the content, and the page is visible. And of course, now the hydration kicks in as well. So we have the hydration again, and then it works like a plain old single page application. The good part here is that you don't have to generate the HTML on the fly. This will save time. But of course, the data isn't as real time as when using dynamic server-side rendering. So yeah, these are, I would say, the three common ways. There's also ISR, incremental static, or ISG, incremental static site generation, which is more or less a combination of dynamic server-side rendering and like caching these into HTML files, which we've seen here. But this is not supported yet in Nuxt3, but being worked on, so stay tuned for that. Okay, and now the second to last step and puzzle here, modular. So, I mean, we live in the NPM universe and generally like all the packages, so we know what modular means, but of course we don't want a package for every small function, like checking if a number is even or odd. Still, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Like if we have an integration for Nuxt for, say, table and CSS, then nobody has to write their own integration again and again. We can just, create a module for that will do the work, and everything's good. So it is super easy with Nuxt modules and plugins to integrate third-party libraries, and then, of course, share your code if you want with others, like open source it or share it in a company. The good part also is that you can hook into workflows of the frameworks on demand. So Nuxt is very, very configurable, not only through our Nuxt config file, where you can write all things like also changing Vite and Webpack configs. You can also hook into the process itself. For example, before you render a route, do something, or before you generate an HTML file, strip out all the JavaScript, or after generating all the files, create a sitemap out of these files. So these are all valid use cases that can be used in modules to add functionalities, whatever your business requirements are and what you need. And as I mentioned, that's a perfect chance to share an open source, especially if you thought about integration that's not there yet, because I'm pretty sure at least 10 other people want to use it too. So the good part here also is there is a website called modules.nuxtjs.org, and it lists all the modules from the community here. And there are right now 187 modules with lots of downloads and lots of contributors. So you could also check out what integrations are there for example, integrating Bootstrap, integrating or adding a proxy, and you also see if it's like supporting Nuxt2 or Nuxt3 or the Nuxt bridge, which is a compatibility layer for between Nuxt and Nuxt2 and 3. So you can check it out there, and if you have something you want to add, of course, feel free to do so. I mean, it's all open source. And the last part is called being developer friendly. And this is, of course, super important for a framework because you want to use it and love it as much as we do, right? So that's the goal. If it sparks joy, then keep it. Yeah. So okay, that's not the best screenshot, but like whenever, of course, you start a server, you see all the timings, like how long we took time to warm up, to build things, how long Nitro took, the new Nuxt server engine. There is a new Nuxt CLI that also works amazingly well. And you have, whenever you create a new Nuxt application, you have this cool starting screen where say like, hey, your new project, go documentation, which is also well written, and of course is adapted and improved again and again. And also, of course, a few first steps here and there. And then we also have auto imports for components and also composables in Nuxt, which means you have the opportunity to auto import everything from these folders I've showed before, so from components and composables here, without like adding that explicitly to the script tag, but you still have like full auto completion for TypeScript. And of course, talking about TypeScript, first class citizen of Nuxt, Nuxt 3 has been rewritten in TypeScript, and it works amazingly well. Even if you're not a TypeScript fan yourself, you'll benefit from all the auto completion. Whew, okay, lots of words here. So besides that, of course, meaningful error messages, very important, I think here. And the documentation should be quite thorough, especially for Nuxt2. For Nuxt 3, which is in beta, will be added more and more. But I think one of the most important parts is that we have an amazing community. So we have Discord for like help suggestions, of course, a bit chit-chatting. Help in terms of like how should I get started and stuff for like issues, bug reports, and questions, or like larger questions. You can use Stack Overflow, for example, but also GitHub discussions, which is our preferred platform right now. But yeah, if you have something on your heart, if you want to suggest something or just connect with people who like Nuxt and Vue 2 and Vue 3, then check out discord.nuxtjs.org. So yeah, here we go. One important part I have to mention before we go into live coding is Nuxt 3 is still in beta. Nuxt 2 is not, of course. Nuxt 3 is still in beta. So please feel free, give it a spin, and yeah, just tell us what you enjoyed or what you did not enjoy, if there were like hiccups and stuff, and if there are like any maybe severe problems with your use case. But please keep that in mind. Don't expect like, oh, it's everything production ready, because that's not the case. If you wonder when this will happen, there's a roadmap. I can't disclose any date because we don't know either. It's ready when it's ready. Okay, lots of words. Let's do what you all came from, and I hope this will work fine. Live coding. So we will initialize our Nuxt 3 application. We will check out some file system routing, data fetching, and maybe even server-side rendering. Okay. Are you ready? I hope you are. Time-wise, it doesn't look too bad either. So let's go. So I'm using light mode. Don't judge me. It's, of course, for presentation, so you can see everything. And I will also increase the font size a little bit. Here we go. So what I did, I showed it in the terminal. I just did npx nuxi, which is the new Nuxt CLI, init, and then the folder name. So this will just bring up the minimal template. And then I cd into the folder, open it Visual Code, install dependencies, and here we are. Okay, so what we'll do next, clear the terminal because it looks messy otherwise, and we will start with yarn dev, or YD in this case, shortcuts, yay. The server, and it's already there. So we have it on localhost, and it uses the Nuxt CLI, and there we go. So let's go back to the presentation, but switch tabs, and unable to connect? Not anymore. So here we are. And this screen should be familiar to you because I showed it like 2 slides before, the starting screen, which is based on this Nuxt welcome component. So what we can do is we can delete it and just write hello, we are developers. And there we go. Super quick hot module reload thanks to Vite. I would have it on split screen, but well, I have 2 monitors. You only have 1, so at least for the presentation. So let's keep it at that. Okay, so what are we going to do? We have initialized the application. That was fairly easy, I would say. So let's get started with file system routing, file system-based routing. So let's create a pages folder. And in our pages folder, we can create a file, say, what do we do? Same, we take mountains, and then we say index.view. Okay, so this is not showing anything so far. So let's say template, and then we say mountains, question mark. Of course, we can wrap it in H1, so it looks a bit better. All right. And in our app.view, we have to add the Nuxt page component. Otherwise, we don't see the Nuxt page. Okay, so we have that. We have this. Let's switch back. Oh, we get a 404 here. So let's say mountains. And I had that one before because I haven't set up my laptop properly. Let's restart the server. This is something you usually don't have to do. And there we go. So yeah, bear with me. That's my hardware problem. And we have here mountains. Okay, so this looks pretty easy. What we want to do next is, of course, or what we do next, is we want to add some slug here, slug.view. And again, you want to render that. So we can do this easily. Let's add a script setup block here too, which we won't use so far. And we say $route for the current route. And we have autocomplete, as we see here. And we say params.id. No, it's .slug. That looks better because we named slug over here. So if we go back, and I think I have to restart too, so sorry in advance if that's a thing. Yeah. I think I have to fix the watcher part here. So thanks God, we can see the loading screen now, and now we see 1, 2, 3. Amazing. So not too shabby. So what we want to do now is in our app.view here, we can add some links. So we use our Nuxt link component, which is there to perform client-side navigation. And we say to / index basic things. Or not, that's not called index, that's called home. Less tacky. And we say mountains. And say mountains. Okay, save it. And we have, yeah, it's not styled very well, of course. Home, mountains, all cool. But what we really want is, of course, in mountains, we want a list of mountains. So we say, let's add an unordered list and list elements. And we use a v4 mountain in mountains. I know we don't have any mountains yet. So we say mountain, but we will get some. Oops. So let's add a script block again, script setup, and let's say const mountains equals, and of course, before we get them, A, B, C. So let's check. We're at mountains, and we will use, for a second, the API, the Nuxt.js.dev. I'm not sure if you were, but that's a super cool API. So when we do like mountain ABC, which you can see here, should definitely add some line breaks. Better. But you want to get the corresponding mountain here. So what we can do is we can say const data equals use fetch, which is composable provided by Nuxt itself. And we can say here, let's give me the mountains, so these, and then we add some slug here. And of course, we have to get that slug somehow, and we did that already in here, but we can't just copy paste that. So if you would do that, it will, I'm pretty sure it won't work. So we can try that, reload, and see, ooh, that doesn't look good. Console, route is not defined. Because we're in the script setup syntax, we have to use it a bit different. We can say route is use route, And again, this is provided for via router originally. Now we can say const slug equals computed route params slug. Here we go. And now we can say this plus slug.value and convert it to a template string. So we get the data. All right. And now let's run our data even here. And it's seen that Nitro hung up due to the error before. Yeah, perfect. Okay, one thing we really should not forget is the await here, of course, because otherwise it won't spit out anything. So let's say mountains ABC, that won't work because it's not the right slug. So let's take that one here, the first one, the list from Argentina. And amazing, we get all the content. So what's happening here is the slug from over here is interpreted because we set pages mountain slug, so that part after mountains has been taken as the slug. We access it here as a computed property, and then we use it in the URL for use fetch. And because we await that, this is available. And then, of course, we just render out the data. So if we go just back here 1 second, we can do view page source. And this is interesting. And now here you see hello VR developers, of course, and also the whole content in the HTML. And this is basically server-side rendering, of course. Why is it the case? If you have an SPI, you would just see an empty, more or less empty HTML file. And here you see all the data. So this is server-side rendering baked in by default. You don't have to do anything here. And of course, we could go further and say, hey, we can do more or less the same here. Say we take that over here. Oops, no, we need template still, I think. And let's say mountains. We don't need that slug here. And now we can loop over it and say mountains.title. I don't know why the socket hangs up, but anyway, now we see loading screen in the source. Okay, home. Mountains did not want to work. But let's see why this should also work fine. We have the await inside. So let's just see if I just mistype the endpoint. No, that looks good. And we are at mountains, but no, it simply won't come through. And yeah, classic iteration error. Okay, let's see. Nevertheless, we can try it in another way. We can just say mountains.view here. Because of course there are a couple of ways to register files, and now I just throw it all away. And let's just take it over here. Remove the mountain part. We don't need a slug because we don't have one. No route. Script setup is fine. And we always see the Vite server building. So there we go. That looks great. That's the info we need. So instead of rendering all the data out here, we want to say, hey, give us an unordered list. And we need a list item v4 mountain in mountains. And we want to render the title, mountain.title. Of course, we can also use TypeScript to add types here, but for the sake of brevity, I want to stop that here. So this is using, as I mentioned, the API from Nuxt3 dev, which has lots of opportunities. We have mountains, we have beers, posts, whatever you like. So if we just add a slug from down here, we can get all the info. This is fully static, and this is ideal for testing if you don't want to have your typical like foo bar whatsoever. So let's see. This is not rendering because we have to use data mountains. Name it correctly, and there we go. Now we have the names, and now we finally want to also add some Nuxt links to them so they can be linked to. And then our tiny live demo is done. Of course, this just barely shows the capabilities of Nuxt, but if you have any questions, then please put them in a tab, and I hope I can answer them sufficiently. So where we want to link to /mountains, of course, and then we want to add a slug as well. So plus mountain.slug. Again, we can save that as is, and these are now links. And if we click on them, nothing happens because though it should. Nevertheless, this is how you'd write the Nuxt link, connecting the different entries from the list to the mountains, and then the slug will trigger, fetch the data again, and display them. I know why it won't work for in this case. I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure I will upload the version to GitHub where it works. And also, of course, deploying the whole thing on, I think Netlify is the easiest way. So I will add that especially to slide links. So yeah, so far so good. We initialized our Nuxt application. We add file system routing. We checked out data fetching roughly with like use fetch. There are also a few other ways, like you can use async data. You can do it all lazily. And we did a bit of server-side rendering. So yeah, I think this should be the conclusion of our small parts. As usual, live coding can be a bit tough. Nevertheless, thanks for your attention. And yeah, thanks for having me. If you have any questions, shoot them in the tab. And also after the presentation, shoot me a DM on Twitter. Reach me on Discord, wherever you like. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. It was a great session. Also with the live coding. I mean, every once in a while something can happen, but I think that's the magic of live coding.
True.
So we have one question. I think our developers are either too tired or a lot of questions were also asked on today's session on Nuxt3. But Alexander is asking, is white when enabled only used for development mode or for production mode as well?
So you can toggle that. You can decide if you want to use Vite on the whole project and either use Webpack 5 or Vite. So this works for both dev and production.
Great. Yeah, I think if there are no any questions from the audience, they're saying in the comments, thank you and great session. So yeah, I also have to say my compliments, very good session. And yeah, as you said, you guys feel free to contact Alex after the session on his socials or even here in Hubelo. I'm sure he will stick for a few more minutes to answer any of your questions privately. And yeah, thank you, Alex, very much.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, shoot me your questions and see you around.
It was a pleasure. See you. Bye. And yeah, you guys stuck with me for one more session after this. See you in around 15 minutes. And yeah, let's close this event together. Thank you.
UiPath Studio. One tool, one installer. 3 ways to automate for every kind of developer. UiPath Studio is intuitive and has many simple templates to get you started quickly. There's detailed documentation and free training with UiPath Academy. And because they are all on the same product, you can share your automations and collaborate on more complex projects, enabling good ideas to flow throughout the company. Get started with Studio today.
When you're building an application, there's a lot of pressure to keep security vulnerabilities out of your code. But no matter how skilled you are, between your own code, dependencies, and configurations, you can't catch them all on your own. But that's why Sneak's here. We're the secure development platform that can extend the security reach of every developer. With Sneak, you don't have to handle security vulnerabilities on your own. Sneak. Develop fast. Stay secure.